Hey guys, tonight we slip off our sandals, step into a swirl of ancient desert air, and wander through the sun-baked streets of ancient Persia, a place where summer heat doesn't just simmer, it radiates like an oven turned up to betrayal. And yet, somehow, ice exists. Cold, crisp, delicious ice. In the middle of the desert. Picture this. You're standing under a sky so blue it makes your eyelids ache. The earth beneath you is cracked and warm like a stovetop. You're drenched in sweat. Your lips feel like old parchment, and yet, off in the distance, you see people calmly sipping rose water cooled with snow. Snow in the desert. Your brain gently short circuits. How they do it? You're about to find out. But first, a quick reality check. If someone dropped you into 400 BC Iran and said, hey, go find ice, you'd probably survive about 20 minutes tops. Not because you'd die of thirst, although that's a strong contender, but because you'd lose your mind trying to understand the genius infrastructure it took to make any of this possible. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from a sleepy town or a bustling city, leave a comment with your location and local time. It's always magical to see where this quiet little time machine reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward on a dusty path. Your sandals stir up fine powder, the scent of dry earth rising with every step. You're approaching a city on the edge of the desert. Yaz, perhaps, though it could just as easily be Ray or Isfahan. The architecture rises out of the heat waves like a mirage carved in clay. Domes, towers, alleys curling like lazy smoke. And even in the thick heat, you notice something strange. People aren't panting. They're walking calmly. There's no frantic fanning or flailing. A boy trots past with a clay jug balanced on his shoulder, and you catch the unmistakable clink of ice cubes inside. Ice, actual cubes. In Persia, it feels like discovering air conditioning in a treehouse. You glance up at the sun, it hasn't moved. Still angry, still glaring. And yet the people here live like the heat is just a suggestion. You trail behind the boy with the jug. Maybe he'll lead you to the source of this icy sorcery. You pass under a stone arch and into a shaded square. The walls are thick and high, casting cool shadows that feel like stepping inside a fridge. At the center is a squat, dome-shaped structure. At first it looks like a kiln, then a beehive, then maybe some kind of upside-down bowl for Titan's breakfast? It's not labeled. It doesn't hum or steam or glow, but something about it pulses with ancient genius. You squint. The base of the dome sinks down below ground level. It's as if the structure is hiding something, guarding something. Something cold. Your eyes widen. This might just be what you're looking for, a yakshul, one of Persia's great ancient achievements. A desert refrigerator that stores ice with no electricity, no magic, just design and deep, relentless patience. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. Yakshuls were real. These conical buildings, made with a special insulating mud brick mixture called saruj, kept ice frozen through the brutal summer. Some stood over 60 feet tall and were used for everything from food storage to chilling sweet desserts for the nobility. And here's the quirky twist. These ancient Persians didn't just store ice, they made it. Right here, in the desert, with starlight and science. They used shallow pools called ice pits outside the yakshul, strategically placed to maximize nighttime heat loss. During frigid desert nights, water would freeze, sometimes just a thin crust. And by morning, workers would scrape up what had formed and carry it into the dome for safekeeping. Historians still argue whether the process was efficient enough to meet high demand, or if only the elite got the real good stuff. But clearly, it worked well enough for the idea to survive over centuries. As you walk around the dome, you see people entering and exiting through low archways. No doors, just curtains and angled tunnels to keep the heat out. The interior, you hear, drops steeply underground. It's not just storage. It's a kind of cold tomb, layered with blocks of ice, bundles of herbs, jars of preserved fruits. The walls are thick, like a giant thermos made of earth and time. You run a hand along the exterior. It's warm to the touch, sun-baked, but not hot. Not radiating the way everything else is. It's holding the cold in. You imagine sleeping inside on a summer night, cocooned in that ancient chill, wrapped in the breath of snow. And then someone walks past eating what looks like a slushie. Yes, a crushed ice and honey treat. You gape. That shouldn't exist here. But it does. You're no longer in the world of what's possible. You're in the realm of what the Persians already solved 2,500 years ago. One last detail catches your eye before you go. Someone has carved a tiny symbol into the base of the dome. A sun being swallowed by a crescent moon. Heat conquered by night. It's not labeled, but the message is clear. They knew what they were doing. You step away slowly, almost reverently. The heat presses down on your shoulders again like a familiar old blanket. But now, beneath the quiet clay dome behind you, cold dreams wait patiently for the next sweltering day. You return the next morning, though morning in the desert feels like waking up inside a bread oven. The light is already aggressive, baking the sand into rippling illusions. But there is again that same strange dome, somehow not shimmering with heat. The Yakshal doesn't just sit passively in the landscape, it commands it. Its sloped sides, angled like the shell of a cautious armadillo, aren't there for looks. They're aerodynamic, functional. They deflect wind, sun, and time. You circle it again, feeling like a detective at the scene of a 2,000-year-old cold case. A worker pulls aside a fabric flap and disappears into the dome. You follow. It's dark and blessedly cool. The drop in temperature feels almost personal, like the building is greeting you. The air is slightly damp, a whisper of melted frost clinging to the stone. Your footsteps echo softly down the slope as you descend into the pit. And then you see it. Massive blocks of ice, stacked like sleepy giants, misting quietly in the gloom. Some wrapped in straw, others stacked beside clay jars of rose syrup and preserved melon. The light filters down from a pinhole near the top of the dome, casting golden spears across the frozen stash. You just stepped into an ancient snow globe. Let's pause for our mainstream fact. The word Yakshal literally means ice pit in Persian. And this was no metaphor. These structures were built with subterranean chambers lined with insulating materials. Often that special sarouj mix again, made of sand, clay, egg whites, goat hair, and lime, that could resist both water and heat. The result? A building that fought the desert sun with stubborn grace. The structure is deceptively simple, but its design is a masterclass in passive engineering. The tall conical dome draws warm air upward and out through a small vent at the top. At the same time, cold air, denser and heavier, settles at the bottom, cradling the ice in a natural refrigeration zone. No fans, no freon, just physics and patience. And here's your quirky fringe fact. Some Yakshals were so well constructed, the ice stored inside would last for months. That's right, blocks of ice harvested during January might still be around in July. In Persia, where eggs cook on rooftops, as your eyes adjust, you spot something unusual, a small wooden bucket hanging near the back wall. Someone's carved names into it, over and over again, in various scripts. One looks suspiciously like early Georgian. Another is definitely Arabic. There's even a symbol that resembles a star with a hook beneath it. A merchant's mark? Turns out, Yakshals weren't just for royal courts or wealthy homes. In many towns, they were community projects with entire neighborhoods pooling resources to keep a shared ice reserve. These buckets? They may have belonged to families who had scheduled days to collect their fair share. Ancient ice subscriptions. Cool before it was cool. Historians still argue whether this level of access was widespread or mostly symbolic. Was it really a community fridge or just a privilege cleverly dressed up as tradition? The records are fragmented, but the footprints, literal and figurative, say a lot. A soft voice behind you startles you. It's a boy, maybe 9 years old, holding a chipped clay cup filled with slushy rose ice. He offers it without a word. You accept, sip carefully, and nearly weep. The chill hits your teeth like a whisper from the Caucasus Mountains. It's sweet, floral, and ridiculously refreshing. You thank him. He nods solemnly, then gestures upward toward the dome. "It's older than my grandfather's grandfather," he says quietly, like the structure might hear him. And you believe him. Outside again, the world feels hotter than before, like you've been reborn into sunlight. But now you understand why that odd-looking mud dome is so revered. It's not a relic. It's a miracle. And yet, it's one of many. You squint into the distance. You're told there are dozens more yakshuls in this region alone, each slightly different depending on geography, climate, and local materials. Some are low and squat, designed for sandier winds. Others are narrow and tall, built for nights when the cold plummets like a stone. You begin to walk again, the soft crunch of gravel under your sandals. Every so often, you spot another dome on the horizon, almost like desert mushrooms dotting the flats. Except these aren't fungi, they're time machines. Still standing, still storing, still showing off. In a world where we panic when the fridge hums too loud, the elegance of these ancient solutions is almost unfair. You can't help but smirk. Somewhere out there, a Persian engineer in 400 BCE is laughing at your energy bill. Before you move on, you glance back at the dome. It stands silent and stoic in the rising heat. The wind picks up slightly and dusts the outer shell in gold. You realize that, just maybe, this structure isn't just a refrigerator. It's a monument to calm thinking in a crisis. And given the heat on your back right now, you're ready to learn more. You're barely 20 steps away from the yakshul when someone calls your name, which is odd because you haven't told anyone your name. You turn, half expecting a mirage in sandals, but instead, it's a wiry old man in a sun-bleached turban. His eyes are sharp, too sharp for this heat, and his smile has the calm patience of someone who's seen more summers than you've had cold showers. "You want to see how they made ice, don't you?" he asks, as if it's the most natural thing in the world. And because the desert heat has already turned your brain into mashed lentils, you nod. Of course you do. He leads you past the dome and out into a flat, dry field lined with a strange, shallow basin, almost like a skating rink carved into the desert floor. The edges are low, just a few inches of raised stone, and it stretches out toward the horizon like a sunken mirror. "This," he says, with a sweep of his hand, "is where it begins." Mainstream fact time. These shallow pools were called ice pits, and they were central to the ancient Persian method of freezing water without any mechanical help. The trick was exploiting the extreme temperature drop between day and night in the desert. During winter nights, when the air plunged below freezing, even in arid regions, water would begin to solidify. The method was deceptively simple. Fill the pit with a thin layer of water in the evening. Let the frigid night air work its magic, and then scrape up the delicate ice crust by morning. Repeat every night for weeks, storing the yield inside the yakshul. One tray at a time, one glimmering pane of frost after another. Ice in installments. You try to imagine it. A crew of workers tiptoeing around in the cold pre-dawn, their hands red from the chill, carefully shaving off ribbons of frozen water before the sun rises to undo their progress. It's like trying to make snowmen in a sauna every single day. The old man laughs when you say this. Sometimes the ice was barely a finger's thickness, but it adds up, especially if you have 20 pits and 50 people. He squints at you. We had discipline. You can't argue with that. Here's a fun, fringe detail. Some villages even experimented with adding salt or using reflective marble to speed up the freezing process. One tale, half legend, half possible, speaks of a priest who sang invocations every evening over the water, claiming his voice could summon a deeper frost. No one ever measured the results scientifically, but apparently, his pit always froze fastest. Historians still argue whether these ice-making techniques were widely used across Persia or only in a few high-altitude regions with particularly cold nights. Some claim the freezing pits were more symbolic, ritual offerings to Ahura Mazda for a good harvest, while others insist they were practical and used year-round. You crouch beside one of the empty pits and run your fingers along the rim. The stone is worn smooth from centuries of weather and work. There's a faint white residue, lime, maybe, or ancient salts from endless freezing and thawing. You try to picture it filled with water, the stars reflected on its surface, the slow creep of frost forming while the world sleeps. Then the old man hands you a small tool, a flat wooden scraper with a bone handle. "Go ahead," he says. "Pretend." And you do. You shuffle forward, bend your knees slightly, and drag the scraper across the invisible surface. You hear the imaginary crunch, feel the tug of ancient mornings, see your breath in the air, because in this fantasy, it's very, very early and very, very cold. The man claps once, satisfied. Good enough for your first try. You grin. There's something oddly calming about the idea of this ritual. Each night, the same routine. Let the water freeze. Harvest. Store. Sleep. Repeat. A quiet war against the sun, fought with bowls, buckets, and belief. As the wind picks up, you notice the layout of the pits. They're slightly angled, not just flat. The design channels water into a small trench at the end. Any unfrozen liquid could be reused the next night, instead of being wasted. Efficiency wasn't an afterthought. It was sacred. And here's where things get even better. In some cases, families would compete to see who could get the most ice. Not formally, of course. But if your uncle's pit yielded more than your father's 3 nights in a row, there were going to be opinions voiced at dinner. As you stand there, in the middle of an ancient refrigeration system built by moonlight, you feel a tug, not of history, exactly, but of admiration. These people didn't just endure the heat. They stared in the face and built a frozen rebellion with stone and water. You glance back toward the dome, now hazy in the morning light. The system is clear now. Freeze outside, store inside. Cold by night, shade by day. And everything designed with intention. The old man is walking away now, leaving you in the middle of the ghostly pits. You follow slowly, your feet dragging through the fine dust. The sun climbs higher. You can almost hear it scoffing at your little frozen memories. But that's the point, isn't it? You've seen how ice was made here, not by magic, but by rhythm. A human rhythm, set to the tempo of stars and sun. Cold, created one night at a time. And you suddenly feel cooler, somehow, even with sweat tickling your neck. You leave the ice pits behind, still half imagining the glint of starlight on frozen water. But the old man isn't done with you yet. He waves you toward another oddity in the distance, a tall, narrow tower jutting out a mud brick house like a periscope for desert submarines. At first, you think it's a minaret or some kind of lookout post. But as you get closer, you hear it. Wind, not whistling, not howling, just a long, soft, low breath like the desert itself is exhaling. This, he says, pointing up, is how we cooled our homes and kept the Yakshal colder than death's handshake. You crane your neck. The structure is made of baked clay, elegantly simple. Slender, vertical slits face different directions, like windows waiting for a breeze. And when you step inside the house beneath it, you feel it instantly. Cool, dry air sweeping down through the shaft and brushing against your cheeks. It's not a trick of imagination. It's a badger, a wind catcher. Mainstream fact alert. Badgers are one of the oldest forms of passive air conditioning. Ancient Persians mastered this centuries before electricity. The towers captured even the faintest breeze and channeled it downward into homes, storage areas, and, yes, the Yakshals. When no breeze was available, the towers created air circulation through pressure differences and thermal siphoning. In other words, the hotter it got outside, the stronger the air moved inside. You sit beneath the draft and let it wash over you. It's not icy. It's not even cold. But compared to the frying pan exterior, it feels like leaning into a refrigerator after a long jog. The old man nods approvingly. The tower listens to the sky, he says, as if that explains everything. You notice that the house is connected to a narrow, sloping corridor that disappears underground. The air there feels even cooler. You walk into it and find a tiny trickle of water running through a shallow stone canal at your feet. That's the Kanat, the man explains. Water from the mountains, traveling under the earth. Silent, clean, and always moving. Fringe fact incoming. Kanats, These underground water channels are some of the greatest unsung engineering feats of the ancient world. They were built at gentle, precise slopes to carry groundwater across miles, even deserts, without pumps. Some canons have been in continuous use for over 2,500 years. One of them once delivered water to an ice pit and badger system so efficient, it kept dates chilled into midsummer. Historians still argue whether the combination of badger and canid and yakshuls was universal or reserved for specific elite projects. Some claim it was the gold standard of Persian architecture. Others think it was a rare innovation, only found in wealthy cities like Yazd and Kerman. Either way, standing here now, it's hard to imagine anyone choosing not to use this clever system. You walk slowly through the underground corridor, the air getting cooler, damper, as the wind catcher above continues its lazy breathing. This combination, badger pulling air down, cannet channeling water through, and thick saruj walls locking out the heat, is what made Persian refrigeration so absurdly efficient. And the quiet, the stillness, it all adds to the spell. You suddenly remember a modern fridge back home that broke down one summer and turned your lettuce into soup. And here you are, in a desert tomb made of clay, and it's doing a better job than your overpriced appliance ever did. There's a soft tapping behind you. A boy, different from the slushy kid earlier, carries a sealed clay jug. He nods to the cannet and gently lowers the jug into the channel, anchoring it with a rock. "We leave it here for a while," he whispers. "Then the water tastes like snow." You smile. You don't know how long a while is in ancient Persian terms, but you can't argue with the poetry of it. The tunnel slopes upward again, and you follow the gentle climb back into sunlight. You blink as the desert reclaims its heat and volume. The old man is waiting near the tower, leaning against a wall like it's no big deal that his ancestors invented air conditioning before most of Europe had bathrooms. He doesn't say much, just tilts his head toward the dome in the distance. "They think the desert only knows fire," he says, "but we made it remember ice." And with that, he vanishes around a corner, possibly to go sip more snow-flavored rosewater in peace. You're left standing between wind, water, and warmth. You're starting to see the full picture now. The Yakshul wasn't a lonely miracle. It was part of a bigger network. A brilliant, breath-powered orchestra of natural forces, all designed to do one thing: give humans a little coolness in a world that wants them roasted. You run your hand along the base of the badger. The clay is warm but steady, solid. You can hear the wind still whispering down, like a memory, like a voice saying, "We figured this out 1,000 years before your thermostat." You smile again, not because it's funny, though it kind of is, but because it's humbling. And you're ready now to see where all this cold actually went. Your feet crunch softly over the sand as you walk away from the badger, but your mind is spinning like a potter's wheel. Wind catchers, underground canals, star-cooled ice. It all sounds like sorcery wearing a lab coat. But the question lingering in your throat is a practical one. What do they do with all this ice? Because it wasn't just for flaunting or occasional dessert drama. Ice had a place in everyday life, woven into rituals, medicine, trade, and celebration. And, of course, where there's ice, there's an economy. You're about to walk into the chilled heart of Persia's ancient cold supply chain. You enter a bustling courtyard, a sun-drenched hive of activity. Merchants bark over each other, loading up crates and satchels. A camel chews something suspicious looking near a pile of straw-wrapped blocks. You step closer and catch the unmistakable sheen of half-melted ice glinting inside. Mainstream fact time. Ice was indeed transported across miles of desert terrain, from yakshuls to cities, palaces, and markets. Caravans carried insulated bundles, sometimes wrapped in straw or canvas, sometimes buried in salt, to keep the chill intact. And yes, it often made it. Your brain tries to compute the logistics. No coolers, no dry ice, just carefully timed night journeys and ruthless efficiency. The ice was often moved before dawn, packed tightly on animals or carts, and delivered to those who paid the most or needed it the most. The man overseeing this particular operation is short and wide, with arms like rolled carpets and a voice like gravel. He grumbles at someone for stacking blocks unevenly. You chip it, you buy it, he snaps. You spot an assistant brushing the blocks with crushed herbs before they're packed. You ask why. He grins. It slows melting, and it makes the air smell nice. Fringe fact: some traders experimented with layering herbs like mint, myrtle, or basil between ice slabs, not just to reduce melt, but to subtly scent the cargo. In certain circles, it became a trend. If your guess sherbet didn't have a hint of rosemary, were you even trying? Historians still argue whether these long-distance deliveries were common trade or elite indulgence. Some believe only royalty and high officials had regular access to imported ice. Others suggest that in regions close to mountains or with well-established cannon systems, ice blocks were common enough for markets and even mid-tier households. A young boy waves you over to a wagon and lifts the canvas flap. Inside, nestled among layers of hay, are glazed clay jars. The label on one, scrawled in early Persian script, reads Sheer Panner, milk cheese. It's ice-cooled dairy, bound for a nearby village. You touch the side of a jar. It's not cold, but it's definitely cool enough to delay spoilage. And in a world before refrigeration, that's like having time in a bottle. You're suddenly aware of just how precious this cargo is. Perishables preserved by patience, not power cords. People paid more for it cold, the boy says. Even milk, even fish. Wait, fish? You glance at the merchant again. You transported fish? He nods. From the Caspian, sometimes. Salted, but for the king's kitchen, fresh. Barely dead. And just like that, the whole ice economy widens before your eyes. This isn't just a neat trick. It's infrastructure. It's industry. A delicate, high-stakes dance of timing, temperature, and trade routes. Some yachtals, especially those near ports or royal roads, became part of an actual supply chain. Ice was harvested and moved from desert to desert like a ghost commodity. It vanished quickly, sure, but the value it carried was immediate and memorable. A well-timed block of ice could change a menu, heal a fever, or impress an ambassador. And let's not forget the emotional economy. Being the host who served chilled honey water at a banquet was chef's kiss levels of prestige. A woman nearby calls for a water merchant. She's holding a bowl of pomegranate seeds floating in crushed ice. You blink. It's not a mirage. She stirs it lazily with a reed spoon, offers you a taste. It's divine. Cold, tart, sweet, absurdly fresh. She smiles. Made with mountain snow, carried on camelback. You almost drop the spoon. That brings us to one final twist. Some of this ice, especially in northern Persia, was not just artificially frozen, but harvested from natural snowfields and glaciers. Men traveled up into the high passes of the Alborz Mountains during winter, packed snow into thick-walled crates, and hauled it down with animals. The snow was often mixed with salt to slow melting and stored deep in yachtals or ice houses near the base of the mountains. It sounds ludicrous until you remember that even today, people hike with coolers full of shrimp to beach picnics. Humans will move heaven and earth for good food and a little chill. As the merchant slaps a heavy tarp over the last of the blocks, you hear a faint ringing, bells on the camels. The caravan begins to move like a slow, grumpy glacier. One of the drivers pats the side of his animal and mutters, "Last time he sneezed on the jars. I almost lost a whole pot of yogurt." You chuckle. This isn't just innovation, it's also chaos. Ancient ice wasn't perfect. It dripped, it cracked, it sometimes disappeared en route. But for every failure, there were 10 moments of quiet joy. A cool drink, a saved batch of dates, a baby's fever soothed with snow wrapped in cloth. You watch the caravan fade into the dusty horizon, ice clinking softly beneath straw and wool. And in that moment, surrounded by the sound of melting history, you understand the ice economy wasn't just about surviving the heat. It was about winning against it gracefully, cleverly, and with just a dash of mint. The camels plod off into the shimmering distance, their slow rhythm like a lullaby of hooves. You're still savoring the last cool tingle of that pomegranate dessert when you hear faint music, something plucked on strings, soft as wind through reeds. Drawn like a curious moth, you follow the sound. It leads you toward a high-walled courtyard draped in blooming vines. Inside, the shade is heavy and fragrant. Rose, jasmine, and something deeper, almost metallic, like aged copper and stone. You duck through an arched entry and stop, because what you found is not just a garden. It's a royal cool chamber. In the center stands a marble fountain, its water cascading gently over tiered bowls, each more delicate than the last. Surrounding are low, cushioned benches, embroidered silks, trays of sweets. And the drinks, are in tall glasses misted with condensation. You rub your eyes. Is that a sorbet? Mainstream fact. Ancient Persian royalty were among the first humans to develop and obsess over what we might call frozen desserts. These were early prototypes of sorbet and ice cream. Known as faluda, a mixture of semi-frozen syrup, rose water, and sometimes rice noodles or fruit pulp, made using stored ice or snow. Faluda was a status symbol and a serious culinary achievement. A courtier in a linen robe catches you staring and gestures grandly. Would you care for melon with crushed snow? You nod, stunned, and a servant approaches with a chilled tray. The moment it touches your fingers, you feel it. Actual cold, the kind that makes your skin tense in surprise. The melon is tender, sweet, impossibly fresh. Your teeth hit a tiny shard of ice, and you gasp. It's like tasting sunlight held hostage by winter. The courtier laughs. Imagine trying to explain this to someone from a snowless land. They'd think we were liars. You glance around. The architecture is purpose-built for temperature control. High ceilings, dark tiles, thick sarouge walls. Vents near the ceiling allow warm air to escape. Curtains soaked in water sway gently, spreading cool humidity across the air like invisible mist. Then the music shifts. It's subtle, but rhythmic. Someone begins plucking the setter in a steady cadence. A servant brings out a low table topped with tiny clay jars. He opens one, revealing a pale, grainy paste. It's saffron lime, he whispers, offering you a spoon. For spreading on cold bread. You try it. It's bizarre and brilliant, sweet, floral cool. A kind of proto-popsicle, if popsicles were designed by poets. Fringe tidbit, there are records, mostly in royal inventories and poetic accounts, of Persian courts blending fruit pulp with snow, honey, and even spiced wine, creating a kind of ancient frozen punch. Some claim there were competitions among chefs for who could produce the most elegant chilled dish without offending the gods of summer. That last bit might have been metaphorical, or not. Historians still argue whether these desserts were truly widespread among the elite or only enjoyed on very rare occasions. Some suggest they were more symbolic than functional, designed to demonstrate power over nature. Others believe Persian nobles enjoyed ice-based delicacies far more often than their Western counterparts, simply because they figured out first. You lean back against a cushion and watch as a young girl, no older than 10, plays with a small clay ball packed with snow. She rolls it between her palms, shaping it carefully, then sets it in a bowl of dates like it's the centerpiece of a royal meal. You smile. Ice, even here, is still part play, part ritual. Nearby, a royal physician enters the scene and begins mixing herbs into a copper bowl resting in a shallow ice bath. He stirs slowly, murmuring prayers. You ask what he's making. A cooling paste, he replies. For the prince. Too much sun. Too many figs. You nod solemnly. Figs will do that. Another servant carries in a tray of folded cloths, steam rising faintly from their centers. Wait, no, that's not steam. That's vapor from cold. These cloths have been dipped in ice water and scented with orange blossom, meant for wiping the face and neck. You try one and nearly whimper. The scent, the cold, it's like wiping away fatigue with silk and winter. You suddenly realize this entire palace has been designed around coolness. Not just temperature, but mood. Light, water, movement, music. Everything flows slowly, designed to soothe. And ice. Ice is the secret note in every chord. You remember the yakshal now, its dome brooding in the distance. That simple mud cone was where all of this started. It birthed the snow that made the sorbet. It cooled the syrup. It cradled the fruit. Without that dome, none of this velvet indulgence would exist. And yet, none of it feels wasteful. There's an elegance in how ice is used here. No machines, no roaring freezers. Just cooperation between architecture, wind, shadow, and time. As the music fades, a servant places a soft cloth over the bowl of snow and begins clearing the table. Before sunset, he murmurs, "The heat will come back. It always does." You step out of the chamber, refreshed but strangely reverent. You've just seen what happens when humanity doesn't just survive nature, but curates it, tames it, serves it in a crystal bowl with candied figs on the side. And now, it's time to leave the courts behind and follow ice to another unlikely frontier, the realm of belief. You walk away from the palace, still chilled at the edges like a glass pulled from the fridge. But the world outside is warming again. The air grows heavy with sunlight, and the whisper of fountains fades into silence. You blink slowly, adjusting to the plainness of the street, where camels grunt and women carry baskets of dates instead of crystal bowls of snow fruit. And yet, in a quiet corner of the city, another kind of cool reverence lingers. Not indulgent, but sacred. You follow a stone path leading to a small fire temple, its mud walls scorched by time, its roof ringed with clay urns. A bearded priest in white linen stands at the entrance, calmly brushing ash from his sleeves. He doesn't look surprised to see you. "You've seen what ice does to the body," he says, without preamble. "Now see what it does to the soul." You step inside. It's quiet, cooler than outside. Not because of engineering, but because the building is designed to breathe. Thick walls, shaded windows, and a high ceiling open like a chimney toward the sky. You expect to see flames dancing at the altar, but instead you're shown something unexpected. A shallow basin of water, ringed with white petals, rests on a stone platform. Floating in the center is a single, perfectly preserved shard of ice, the size of a child's hand. You lean in. It's already beginning to melt, slow drops breaking the surface in rhythmic drips. A priest chants softly in Avestan, the ancient liturgical language of Zoroastrianism. The ice isn't decoration. It's an offering. Mainstream fact. In Zoroastrianism, fire and water are both sacred elements, representing purity, energy, and the divine order. Ice, as a hybrid of the two, held unique symbolic power. Though not central to rituals, it occasionally appeared as a purifier in death rites, or a spiritual metaphor for clarity, stillness, and preservation of the eternal flame. The priest gestures for you to kneel. In summer, when the world burns, he says, "This reminds us that Ahura Mazda tempers fire with mercy." You sit quietly. There's no fanfare, no incense, just silence, stone, and a melting thought. Here's your fringe fact. In some mountain regions of Persia, where Zoroastrian traditions blended with local folklore, ice was believed to trap evil spirits, frozen in time, unable to move or whisper harm. Children were warned not to eat the first snow of the year, lest they swallow a wandering ghost. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were doctrinal or just local superstition layered onto Zoroastrian teachings. But there are records, carved into stone tablets, of ceremonial freezing during specific lunar phases, sometimes combined with herbs and chanting. A spiritual freezer, if you will. Back in the temple, you watch the ice melt. No one rushes to replace it. The dripping is almost hypnotic. A woman beside you murmurs a blessing, then dips her fingers into the cold water and presses them to her forehead. You do the same. It's not about temperature. It's about intention, stillness, the quiet transformation from solid to liquid, form to flow, tension to peace. You can't help but think of the yakshal again. So practical, so worldly. And yet, its offspring ends up here, melting in a shrine, reminding people that even fire has a shadow. The priest speaks again. Heat teaches us patience, he says. Cold teaches us memory. You nod, not entirely sure what that means, but it settles in your bones like truth anyway. As you rise to leave, You pass a stone plaque carved in angular script. Someone translates it for you. He who preserves the snow through the seventh sun earns rest in the house of songs. No one can agree what seventh sun refers to. Some say it's midsummer, others think it's a metaphor for spiritual trials. But either way, the idea is clear. To preserve coolness against heat is not just survival, it's sacred labor. Outside again, you pause in the sun. The world seems louder, hotter. You watch a small girl sprint past with a sloshing jug of milk, her feet kicking up powdered sand. Her grandmother trails behind, holding a damp cloth to her brow. Neither complains. They're used to this, but you now carry a secret. Even the gods respected the cold. And there's more. You're beginning to wonder how many places ice touched beyond kitchens and temples. Was there a chill in the alleys of everyday homes? Did travelers use it to ease their feet? Did lovers press snow to their cheeks before midnight meetings? The answers wait around the corner. Literally, you turn down a narrow lane and see a wall carved with tiny handprints. Children, probably, marking a summer long gone. Below the prints is a cracked ceramic pipe jutting from the wall. It drips, just a little. The water is cool. You cup your hands under it and drink. It tastes like earth and limestone and patience. And suddenly, you realize you're ready to follow the path of the wind again. Not to royalty or religion, but to the places where architecture whispers cold, where walls breathe, and where ice is a secret ingredient in the art of being comfortable. The wind shifts again. A soft breeze, playful and dry, curls down the alley, tugging at your sleeves like a curious cat. You follow its lead, deeper into the heart of the city where the buildings seem to lean in close, sharing secrets only the heat can hear. You find yourself walking into a tangle of passages, a quiet maze of earth-toned homes, their mud brick walls sun-faded and calm. Here, shade pools in corners and silence flows like water. And then, unexpectedly, you hear the gentle trickle of something underground. You follow the sound. Around a sharp turn, there's a rectangular stone opening in the street. Narrow, discreet, framed with worn tiles and partially veiled by hanging cloth. A man squats beside it, washing his face with water so clear you can see the smooth pebbles underneath. He sees you staring and motions toward the entrance. "The canet still runs," he says. "Come feel the breath of old water." You crouch down, the temperature dipping immediately. The scent hits you first, damp earth, moss, something ancient and quiet. Then comes the wind. Not strong, not cold, but constant, steady, breathing out from the tunnel below like a sleeping giant. Welcome to the underground arteries of Persia. Mainstream fact, canets are gently sloped underground tunnels used to transport water from higher elevations, often mountain aquifers, to cities and villages. These systems, developed over 2,500 years ago, allowed for sustainable irrigation and water access in desert regions. The gradient was so precise that some canets ran for tens of kilometers without pumps. You ease into the narrow tunnel, feet feeling for carved steps. It's dark, but not oppressive. The water runs to your left in a shallow channel, barely more than a whisper. To your right, carved alcoves offer places to rest. A lantern flickers ahead, held by a boy whose job, you assume, is to guide lost wanderers like you. The tunnel continues far longer than expected. Every few paces, a tiny shaft of light beams down from a vertical well, air vents that double as escape routes and cooling columns. You pause under one. The warm desert wind above pulls air through the tunnel, creating airflow like nature's own air conditioning system. The boy stops, points up. That's how the wind enters the house. And then it clicks. These canets didn't just carry water. They also carried air. When connected to badgers or wind catchers, the flowing air would pull coolness through homes and public buildings. The combination was architectural alchemy, a system that cooled buildings without fire, ice, or even moving parts. You imagine lying inside a home above, the night hot and still. Then, slowly, the wind drifts up through the floor like a ghost, scented faintly with wet stone. It's no miracle. It's math, mud, and movement. Here's your fringe tidbit. In some regions, whispering walls were built into homes along canate corridors. They were thin clay panels that would resonate with the airflow, creating a soft murmur like voices in prayer. Some believe these sounds warded off evil spirits, or, more practically, served as an early working cooling system alert. If the walls went silent, it meant the canate had dried. Historians still argue whether these whispering panels were real acoustic tools or romantic exaggerations passed down through poetry. But old homes in Yazd and Maybad still echo when the wind is right, and the canates still run beneath them. The boy leads you to a small chamber branching off from the tunnel. There's a jug of clay-cold water on a stone bench, along with bowls of dates and dried apricots. This isn't just a maintenance tunnel. It's a social space, a secret one, and you realize this is where neighbors gathered on scorchingly hot days to share food, cool down, exchange gossip, or just exist in peace. The canate wasn't just plumbing. It was community architecture. The boy gestures for you to rest. You sit. He dips a piece of bread in the water. Yes, really, and eats it with a nod of approval. Cold bread for a hot day, he says. You smile. It's deliciously plain. Then, with a quiet hum, he lifts a lid on a clay basin near the wall. Inside, rose water, kept naturally cool. Not frozen, not refrigerated. Just cold enough to soothe your fingertips when you dip them in. And now the truth becomes clear. The Persian cold wasn't always dramatic. It didn't always require ice blocks and camels and royal chefs. Sometimes, it was just the relief of water drawn from silence, of air filtered through centuries-old tunnels, of shade that moved like a shadow but stayed like a friend. As you emerge from the canate, blinking into the harsh light again, your ears still ring with the whisper of water underfoot. Above, you see another wind catcher, a tall one this time, proudly slicing the sky. You watch as the warm air moves past it, lured downward into someone's shaded courtyard. Someone's home, and that's the final image of this section. A system so quietly brilliant, so deeply intertwined with its landscape, that most people forgot to marvel at it. The air moves, the water flows, the rooms stay cool. It just works. But now that you've seen the inside, you'll never forget it. Back on the surface, you find yourself hungry. Not the hunger of sand and sweat, but the kind born of curiosity and smell. Somewhere nearby, something is sizzling, slowly, thoughtfully. It smells of honey, nuts, perhaps a whisper of cardamom, and something else, cold. You follow your nose down a sun-dappled alley and into a small courtyard shaded by a grapevine canopy. A woman in a faded blue robe stirs a copper pot over a brazier. Beside her, a wooden churn is surrounded by clay pots resting in shallow trays of ice water. You blink. She's making dessert. She glances up and gestures toward a low bench. Sit. It's almost ready. You do, of course. It would be rude not to. Mainstream fact. Ancient Persian cuisine featured a wide range of early frozen treats, long before modern refrigeration. The most famous is faluda, a semi-frozen dessert made of vermicelli-like rice noodles soaked in syrup, rosewater, and lime juice. It was stored in containers placed within ice-filled basins, sometimes even churned gently to achieve a fluffy, slushy texture. The woman removes the churn's lid, revealing a pale, icy mixture. It glitters with tiny ice crystals. She spoons it into a clay bowl, tops it with crushed pistachio and threads of saffron, and hands it to you with a grin. You take a bite. It's sharp, floral, barely sweet. The noodles melt away like snowflakes. It's different and perfect. That's the old way, she says, watching your reaction. My grandmother made it for weddings, for funerals, for Tuesdays. Fringe fact, some recipes for faluda included unexpected ingredients: ashes of dried orange peel, fermented rose hips, even powdered pearls, believed to cool the body and calm the mind. In royal households, chefs might add gold leaf for shine. In poorer homes, a pinch of salt and shaved ice made for an affordable, cheerful treat. Historians still argue whether early ice desserts like these were invented solely by the Persians or inspired by exchanges with Indian, Chinese, or even Roman traders. One camp insists Persia was the innovator. Others point to shared techniques across ancient cultures. The answer? Probably both. You savor another bite, and the courtyard melts into timelessness. Bees drone lazily over the grapevine. A cat dozes in the shade. The ice doesn't melt as fast as you'd expect. It holds its shape, stubborn and proud, against the heat. The woman points toward a shelf lined with small jars. Inside, dried lemon slices, cubes of pressed date paste, sprigs of dried mint tied with string. These were not ingredients of convenience. They were amplifiers of cold. Even without freezers, Persian cooks knew how to play with temperature through contrast. Cold syrup on warm cake, cool cucumbers with hot rice, chilled faluda after spicy lamb. You ask about the churn. She laughs. We don't always churn. Sometimes we just bury the bowl in ice. Let the silence stir it. That image stays with you. She places another bowl in front of you. This one filled with sharbat, a chilled, sweetened drink made with pomegranate juice and herbs. Ice clinks at the bottom. The color is ruby. The taste, sun-ripened and clean. Sharbat cools the blood, she says, nodding wisely. Even the angry kind. You're not sure if she means anger or fever, but both feel soothed instantly. You notice that her clay pots aren't buried deep in ice, just nestled in cool water. She explains that layering the vessels in wet cloth and shade, then using slow evaporation from the outer surface, creates natural cooling, even in direct heat. And just like that, you remember, it's not always about ice blocks and yakshuls. Sometimes cold comes quietly, through clay, through wind, through stillness. Then she gestures toward the edge of the courtyard, where a covered shelf holds small bundles wrapped in leaves. Inside one, a slice of what looks like frozen date pudding. For weddings, she says again, you nibble it. The sweetness is deep, smoky. It clings to your teeth like a warm goodbye. But the chill at its core, that stays. You realize this isn't just food. It's a way of life. An understanding of when to be cold, how to be cold, and why cold matters in a world ruled by fire. Every bite you've had, faluda, sharbat, chilled herbs, frozen sweets, it's all part of a centuries-old tapestry. A culture that didn't just learn how to make ice, but how to use it, respect it, elevate it. As you rise to leave, the woman hands you a sprig of mint and a tiny bag of rock sugar. Put it in your mouth, she says. Then walk in the sun. It's like cheating the desert. You do as she says. The sugar crunches softly. The mint flares cool in your chest. And as you step back into the light, you're not sweating. You're smiling. Because now, Persia didn't just invent ancient refrigeration. It invented a language of cold, a flavor of quiet, a celebration of stillness. And you're only halfway through the story. By now, your feet know the rhythm of Persian streets, the soft shuffle through sun-dusted alleys, the pause under archways for a breath of shadow, the tilt of your head toward every hint of moving air. But today you follow different sounds, footsteps and murmurs, laughter, the rhythm of work. It leads you to the edge of the old city, where high walls surround a large courtyard filled with purposeful motion. Women move from basin to basin, hauling cloth, scrubbing bowls, stacking herbs. Their sleeves are rolled, hair tied, faces glistening, not with glamour, but with industry. This is the backstage of Persian refrigeration. You've reached the workforce behind the chill. Mainstream fact: in ancient Persia, women were deeply involved in the daily maintenance of household cooling systems. They managed food storage, oversaw the use of ice and cold water, prepared chilled drinks and preserved fruits, and, crucially, ensured supplies were stored properly in communal or domestic yakshuls. Their labor was invisible to formal records, but essential to function. One woman catches your gaze and nods you over. She hands you a fan made of woven reed, motions to a jar sweating with condensation, and says, "It's date vinegar. Keep fanning, or it'll turn." You obey. Nearby, another woman, older, eyes sharp, leans over a basin layered with cloths. Inside are neatly wrapped bundles, salted fish, pomegranate peels, pickled herbs. They're laid out like offerings. The ice holds them until the caravan comes, she explains. You ask where the ice came from this time. She shrugs. Mules brought it at night, from a high village. Then she mutters, one day, maybe we'll fly the ice and on falcons. You're not sure if she's joking. Fringe fact, some rural communities had women-only ice cooperatives, informal networks where households shared access to communal ice storage, pooled funds for deliveries, and rotated duties for maintenance. These weren't officially documented, but oral histories speak of cold sisters who knew exactly how long a slab would last, when to cut it, and what to cool first. Historians still argue whether these networks were organized systems or just neighborly traditions that grew organically. Either way, they reveal something you've been feeling. Ice wasn't just a product, it was a shared responsibility. One younger woman squats beside a cloth-covered pot and lifts the lid just a little. Inside, you glimpse a creamy white mixture. Yogurt, maybe? She nods. It ferments better with cold breath, she says. Not too cold, just whisper cold. You try to commit that to memory. Then she motions you into a side chamber, smaller, darker, cooler. A few young girls sit grinding herbs with slow, rhythmic movements. They don't talk, just work. At the center is a clay basin filled with a thick, syrupy mixture resting in a trough of crushed ice. It smells like rose and something earthy. This is golub jaman, the girl says. We'll pour it over snow. If the men don't spill the delivery again, you suppress a laugh. This is the hidden labor you never see in palaces or temples. The patient, quiet choreography behind the scenes. A yakshal doesn't restock itself. A royal sorbet doesn't stir alone. And for every clever badger or ice pit, there's someone down here, elbows deep in salt and syrup, turning frost into function. The women here are engineers without title, logisticians without scrolls. They know the weight of melting snow by feel. They can smell if a clay jar has gone too warm. They can balance a tray of drinks across a crowded courtyard without spilling a drop, even while scolding children and rearranging herbs for drying. And here's your moment of realization. This is where cold becomes culture, not in architecture, but in memory, in habit, in the calloused hands that know which fruits spoil fastest or which cloth traps the chill longest. You step back outside, blinking in the daylight. One of the women tosses you a dried lime and says, put it in your pocket. Smell it when the sun gets rude. You do. It smells like shaded afternoons and preserved laughter. You're starting to see the ice differently now. It's not always shimmering blocks or dramatic snow-filled bowls. Sometimes it's the quiet in a storeroom, the cloth draped over milk, the knowing look between two women as they test a batch of chilled yogurt with a fingertip and a nod. As you walk away, you glance back. The courtyard continues its rhythm, pounding, stirring, rinsing, cooling. No one poses for statues. No one signs documents. But the cold moves because they do. And that realization settles over you like a breeze down a badger shaft. Humble, precise, unseen, but absolutely essential. So now, let's follow that cold out of the kitchens and storerooms and into the realm of diplomacy, where even kingdoms used a block of ice to make a point. You leave the courtyard with the dried lime still warming in your palm, its scent lingering in the folds of your sleeve like a pocket of shade. The rhythm of work fades behind you, replaced by a quieter energy, polished sandals on tile, voices lowered to a diplomatic hush. You've reached the part of town where people don't shout. They gesture. This is the divan, the administrative heart of the city, where envoys, scribes, and messengers swirl like slow-moving stars in the orbit of power. You blend into the calm chaos, your ear catching fragments of languages, Arabic, Greek, Armenian, tongues of merchants and monarchs alike. And then you see it, a low table set with brass cups, gilded trays, and, in the center, something utterly ridiculous in this heat. A bowl of ice. Mainstream fact. In elite diplomatic circles of ancient Persia, ice was used not only for food and drink, but as a symbol. Offering chilled refreshments to a visiting emissary in the middle of the desert was more than hospitality. It was theater. It said, "We have power over nature. We have control where others sweat." A servant ladles water into the cups. The ice tinks gently like polite applause. The ambassador, an older man from a northern kingdom, judging by his fur-lined vest, sips and raises an eyebrow. "Did this come from the peaks of Damavand?" he asks. "No," the Persian host says, smiling. "It came from beneath your chair. You nearly spit out your breath." Sure enough, hidden beneath the stone platform is a shallow basin packed with straw and ice. It's a message in architecture. We don't just give you ice, we make you sit on it. Fringe fact: some royal courts reportedly hid ice beneath thrones or floors during hot weather audiences. It kept the air cooler, but more importantly, it impressed visitors. In one exaggerated account, a Greek envoy claimed his Persian host summoned frost from the earth like gods. Historians still argue whether such underfloor cooling was functional or just ceremonial. Was the ice replenished throughout the meeting? Or did the host simply want the visiting dignitary to think they were sitting atop an ancient glacier? You take a seat on a nearby bench, quietly sipping a diluted sharbat handed to you by a surprisingly chatty scribe. "They once gave a whole wagon of ice to the king of Sogdiana," he says, chuckling. "It lasted half a day. Then he asked for a second one." He rolls his eyes. Eastern nobles and their appetites. He gestures toward a wall mural, faded but still vivid. It shows a caravan unloading chests before a tented pavilion. Inside, a robed figure raises a chilled goblet while others sweat visibly around him. You ask if the image is based on a real event. He shrugs. "We exaggerate, but only a little. You're starting to see the pattern. Ice wasn't just for refreshment. It was a flex, an ancient power move. You didn't just build a yakshul to store your fruit. You built it so that in the middle of July, you could hand a glass of snow-laced wine to your political rival and smile as they pretended it wasn't the most glorious thing they'd tasted all year." And here's the kicker. This diplomacy wasn't always friendly. You overhear a tale of a cold insult sent to a rival governor. A box of spoiled food, still chilled with ice, sent as a warning. The message? We have a means to keep this fresh. We chose not to. Another story, more poetic, tells of a marriage alliance where the bride brought snow in her dowry, hauled from the mountains and wrapped in silk. It arrived still intact. The symbolism? Her house could deliver purity, peace, and the luxury of snow in midsummer. Of course, no one remembers whether the marriage lasted. One of the attendants invites you into a small side chamber. On the table is a shallow ceramic tray filled with water and thin slivers of ice, gently spinning. A few petals float among them. Before meetings, the attendant says, "We cool our fingers." Keeps the blood calm. You follow his lead, dipping your fingertips. The sensation is subtle but immediate, a soft release of heat, tension, and impulse. He continues, "My grandfather told me a story. During negotiations with a Roman envoy, our ambassador served only warm drinks. The Roman refused to speak until he was given something cold, so they sent a child running to the yakshul. Hours later, talks resumed, with ice in every glass. You can't help but laugh. So cold drinks were your secret weapon?" "Cold drinks," the man replies, "and stubbornness." As you leave the divan, you glance once more at the central bowl of ice. It's half melted now, but the effect remains. Every cup it filled, every eyebrow it raised, every drop it chilled. It was part of story. A subtle ballet of temperature and pride. Ice didn't just cool throats. It tested alliances. It proved control. It whispered, "We are prepared, even when the world burns." And you know what? You believe it. Now, with royal palaces, religious rituals, and diplomatic tables behind you, you feel something tugging at your thoughts. Where's all this now? Because ice still melts, and some yakshuls don't stand anymore. It's time to search for the ruins, the relics, the final breaths of a cold empire fading into dust. You leave the divan as the light begins to soften, casting long shadows that stretch like lazy cats across the stone. The afternoon sun is gentler now, but the heat still pulses from the earth in steady waves. You tighten your grip on the dried lime in your pocket. It's a little trick you picked up along the way. a reminder that even the smallest cooling ritual matters. Your steps slow as the city thins. The homes grow farther apart. The chatter of markets fades behind you. The scent of rosewater and mint is replaced by dry wind and old dust. You're heading toward the outskirts, toward memory. The first yakshal you see is broken. Its once proud dome slouches like a melting hat. Cracks spiderweb the surface. Half the outer shell has collapsed, revealing the inner pit. Still dark, still cool, but exposed, vulnerable. A small boy kicks a rock nearby. He doesn't even glance at the ruin. You walk closer, careful not to disturb the fragile structure. It feels like visiting a tomb. Mainstream fact: many ancient yakshals in Iran and Central Asia have fallen into disrepair over the past century. Urban development, climate shifts, and the rise of modern refrigeration rendered many obsolete. Some are buried by sandstorms. Others were repurposed or dismantled for construction materials. A few stand as protected heritage sites, but many are simply forgotten. You crouch near the edge and peer into the pit. The air down there is still cool. It stirs gently up toward you like the last sigh of winter, but it carries no ice, only the scent of earth. A nearby plaque, faded and pockmarked, lists a date, 1793. Beneath it, someone has scratched a newer message in charcoal. The dome kept its promise. We forgot ours. You sit beside the structure, the wind brushing past your ears like whispers in a language you almost understand. Fringe fact: in recent decades, some Iranian architects have revived yakshal construction, combining traditional materials with modern design to build passive cooling systems for villages and farms. One recent prototype even stored ice in the middle of the desert, powered only by airflow and shading. The old designs still work. We just stopped listening. Historians still argue whether preserving yakshals should be a cultural priority or an engineering curiosity. Some see them as symbols of lost harmony with nature. Others think they belong in museums, not neighborhoods. But for you, sitting here in the silence, they feel alive, like stubborn monuments that still breathe. You stand and begin walking again. The next ruin appears behind a cluster of low trees, its cone intact but weathered. A group of teens lounge nearby, sharing sunflower seeds and playing with a speaker blaring pop music. They nod as you pass, indifferent to the clay mountain behind them. But there's a small doorway in the side, and curiosity has already taken your hand. Inside, the air is cooler than expected. Quiet. The echoes of laughter and wind fade behind you. You walk the spiral slope downward, tracing your fingers along the inner wall. The floor is dry. No ice. No gas. Just dust, shadows, and the faint imprint of where blocks once sat. You close your eyes. For a moment, you imagine it full again. Stacks of glistening ice, the scent of mint and dates in the air, the quiet pride of generations who fought fire with architecture. And then you open your eyes. It's empty again. Outside, an old man sits beneath the shadow of the dome, sharpening a knife. He looks up, sees the dust on your hands, and smiles. She's quiet now, he says, nodding toward the yakshal. But in my father's time, she's saying. You ask what he means. The way the wind moved through her. The way the ice cracked when it was ready. The boys knew when it was time to pull it. The sound told you. You sit beside him. He doesn't say much else. Just keep sharpening. But after a while, he adds, we didn't need thermometers. We listened. You realize this isn't just about losing structures. It's about losing habits. The rhythm, the ear for temperature, the feel of frost under clay, the way you could judge the heat by the speed of a drip from the ceiling. Even as you sit here, the air is doing its job. The dome, half buried, still shelters you from the worst of the heat. It hasn't given up. You glance back inside once more, then toward the setting sun. Its orange glow hits the top of the dome and casts a perfect shadow across the field. Even broken, the yakshal still knows how to manage light. There's a quiet lesson here, about resilience, about things designed so while they outlive their purpose, about how sometimes the ruins work better than the machines. As the sky darkens and the first evening stars blink open, you stand and walk back toward the city. The wind is cooler now, almost playful. You don't speak, but you feel it. The old cold isn't gone. It's just waiting. The stars are out now, and they look different in the desert. Closer, maybe. Sharper, like someone etched them into the sky with a needle dipped in frost. You walk slowly, your sandals raising little puffs of powdery dust. The city lights are a distant shimmer now. Out here, silence rules. And as you pause to sip from a canteen refilled earlier at a cannet, the question finally bubbles up. Who really invented all this? Not just the yakshul, but the system, the rhythm, the art of turning wind and mud into ice. The answer is, of course, complicated. You reach a small hill where someone has built a modest observation platform, a flat rock, 2 benches, and a weathered placard etched in 3 languages. It reads, Yakshul of Yazd, cold as a story, deep as time. Perfect. You sit and let the question unfold. Mainstream fact, the earliest known yakshuls date back to around 400 BCE in ancient Persia, particularly in regions like Yazd and Kerman. The combination of ice pits, badgers, wind catchers, cannets, and passive insulation formed a uniquely Persian system of desert refrigeration. But elements of similar technologies have been found in other ancient civilizations, too. The Chinese developed ice houses during the Zhou dynasty. The Indians used stepwells and passive cooling long before electricity. Romans stored snow in pits packed with straw. Greeks had snowmen, well, not actual snowmen, but chilled wines, sometimes with mountain snow. And that's where the debate starts. You flip through your mental scroll of scholarly disagreements, classic, dusty, never-resolved debates. Historians still argue whether the Persians truly invented the system or refined a borrowed idea. Ice was a luxury for the elite or a practical staple in more regions than we think. The use of wind towers evolved independently in Egypt, Babylon, and Persia, or spread from one central source. Some of these structures were really used for ice at all, or mostly for food preservation and ventilation. The prevalence of yakshuls was as high as we estimate, or whether we're romanticizing ruins. The truth? Probably all of the above. Cultures learn from each other. Ideas flow like water, quiet, steady, and mostly underground. You sip again, staring out over the faint remains of several more domes in the valley below. Some are crumbling, some restored. One has a small generator beside it, modern irrigation working in parallel with ancient cool. And here's the fringe tidbit you were waiting for. In the 1970s, a Persian engineer attempted to recreate a yakshul using only historical tools and knowledge. It worked. Not only did it store ice, he made it, using shallow night-cooled pools, wind towers, and shaded pits. His findings inspired a wave of passive architecture studies. But his name? Barely remembered outside niche academic circles. And that feels familiar, doesn't it? A society figures out something incredible. It becomes normal, then invisible, then, over time, forgotten. Until someone like you comes along, sleepy, curious, overheated, and starts asking questions again. The stars above you seem to pulse slightly, as if echoing the thought. You imagine standing here centuries ago. No power lines, no hum of cities, just silence. And below your feet, ice. Precious, glistening ice, protected by geometry and grit. You realize you're tracing not just history, but identity. Ancient Persia didn't stumble into this. It built it, chose it, embedded cold into the bones of its society. Not as a novelty, but as proof of order. That even in the face of burning chaos, humans could create equilibrium. Even as you sit there, you feel it again, the subtle change in temperature. The way the air pools gently in low spaces. The lingering memory of water and clay working together like old friends. You look back at the city lights. You know that inside those homes, fridges now buzz and air conditioners hum. The old yakshuls aren't needed, but that doesn't make them obsolete. Because knowledge, even when buried, doesn't disappear. It just waits for someone to notice the shape of the wind. And tonight, that someone is you. The stars arc westward as you walk once more, back toward the city's edge, but not quite entering it. Your mind is still under the dome, still spinning with whispers of wind and clay, still chilled by the memory of something ancient that somehow still works. And that's when the thought strikes. Could we use this today? You stop mid-step, caught by the weight of the question. Because the heat isn't going anywhere. Not for us. Not now. Mainstream fact. In recent decades, architects and engineers facing the climate crisis have begun studying ancient Persian passive cooling methods, yakshuls, badgers, and kannats, as models for sustainable, electricity-free refrigeration. Their efficiency, low cost, and resilience in extreme conditions make them uniquely valuable in our increasingly hot and energy-hungry world. You approach a modern-looking building near the edge of town. Concrete and glass, yes, but rising from the center is something unmistakably old school, a wind tower. Sleek, minimal but functional. Inside, signs point to a research center. Sustainable design inspired by heritage. You slip in. The air inside is cooler than outside. Not air-conditioned cool. Natural cool. A young engineer greets you, sunburnt, animated, sleepless. He gestures toward a working model of a scaled-down yakshul system. Tiny dome, ice pit, wind tunnels, a transparent casing so visitors can see how it all works. We're testing for refugee shelters, he says. Places off-grid. Vatsonis. Heat waves. No power? No problem. You peer closer. In the model's tiny troughs, the water is actually freezing, barely, but visibly. Little flecks of frost cling to the sides. You blink, but it's indoors, you whisper. He grins. The dome's shape and venting do most of the work. We've added heat-reflective clay and optimized the slope for night radiative cooling. It's all from old Persian blueprints. We just dusted them off. You glance around at the charts on the walls. Maps of temperature gradients, wind diagrams, clay mixtures. And then there's a section marked Urban Applications. He walks you over to another display. It shows a modern city block redesigned with passive cooling in mind. Buildings with built-in badgers, cold corridors made with Kannat-style water loops, shaded courtyards, rooftop yakshul pods designed to collect nighttime cold and store it beneath ground. Fringe tidbit. In 2019, a team of Iranian architects constructed a full-scale modern yakshul outside Tehran using only traditional materials. It successfully stored ice for over 100 days without any power. They called it a prototype for a post-electric future. Historians and urban designers still argue whether integrating such ancient methods is scalable or simply symbolic. Critics claim they're too site-specific, reliant on desert climates and open space. Proponents argue that with tweaks, they could be adapted globally, especially in places hit hardest by energy poverty and climate extremes. The young engineer shrugs. We're not saying this replaces fridges, but imagine cutting the power bill in half. Imagine cities where the buildings breathe, where your water stays cold under your floor, and you never hear the hum of a compressor again. He pulls out a scroll. No, not a scroll, a blueprint, but printed on linen. This is for a school. We're trying wind catchers that feed into underground reading rooms. You smile at the idea. Cool air and quiet minds. Seems fitting. Then he hands you a gift, a small clay cylinder the size of your palm. Mini yakshul, he says. Put water in. Leave it overnight. In dry air, it cools just enough to taste the difference. You thank him, slipping the piece into your bag like a relic. It's heavier than it looks. You step back outside into the night air. Still warm, but manageable. And suddenly, everything around you feels different. That dome over there? Not just a relic, it's a manual. That ruined wind tower? A chapter. That Kannat path under your feet? A footnote in a book we stopped reading too soon. Because we've been racing toward the future with plugged-in urgency. But maybe the path forward wins back through the past. Maybe the answer isn't more electricity, but better design. A world where walls curve to catch the breeze. Where rooftops collect cold like harvest. Where ice is stored in silence. And wind is invited indoors not to fight, but to serve. You smile at the thought. It doesn't feel like nostalgia. It feels like strategy. You walk slowly now, not from exhaustion, but from reverence. Each step feels deliberate. as if you're tracing your way through a blueprint bigger than yourself. Around you, the night settles like a silk shawl. The desert has cooled, not dramatically, but just enough to make the skin relax, the shoulders drop. You approach one last dome. It's intact but quiet. No caravan outside, no children playing, just a dark shape rising from the earth like a fossilized breath. A monument to cool logic in a feverish world. You step inside. The familiar scent greets you. Earth, dust, memory. Your footfalls echo down the sloped corridor, and you descend for the final time into a place built for stillness. It's empty, save for a few scattered straw bundles and a basin in the center of the floor. There's no ice, but the air is still cool, still dignified. This place remembers what it was made for. You sit on the floor. Mainstream fact: the principles used in ancient Persian yakshals are now being studied not just by engineers, but by philosophers, environmentalists, even artists. The structures symbolize more than temperature control. They embody a worldview, one that sees nature not as an enemy to conquer, but a partner to collaborate with. You lie back and look up at the dome's apex, a small circle of open sky, framed perfectly by centuries of engineering. The stars peek through it, as if staring down with curiosity. You feel like you're inside a telescope, looking both forward and back at once. And here's your final fringe fact. There are local legends that yakshals whisper, that if you sleep inside one on the hottest day of the year, you'll dream of snow and wake up with answers to questions you never knew you were asking. Most people think it's just poetic nonsense. You, however, are beginning to wonder. Because right now, in the quiet heart of this earthen cathedral, you understand something that no textbook, blueprint, or climate summit can fully teach. Coolness is not just a temperature. It's a mindset. To cool a home without machines. To share ice without waste. To build with the wind instead of against it. These aren't tricks. They're truths buried beneath our obsession with speed and noise. And here, beneath the dome, those truths ring out clearly. Historians still argue whether ancient Persia was the first to do this, whether yakshals were everywhere or only in select cities, whether these methods could scale to modern needs. But down here, the debate dissolves. The air is cool, the silence complete. You don't need to win the argument. You just have to feel it. Your eyes begin to close. You picture a woman layering rose petals into a clay jar of snow, a boy scraping ice before sunrise, a camel lumbering through the desert with a cargo of chill, a priest blessing a shard of frost before wedding. You picture wind slipping through towers, water whispering under the earth, hands pressing clay, lips sipping slowly, cold, not as a sensation, but a story. And now, that story fades gently into dreams. Wind down 300 words. You lie there, still and warm, cradled by the curve of the earth and the soft weight of history. The walls around you don't speak, but they hum, a low, comforting lullaby carried in layers of clay and lime. The air holds its shape. The night presses lightly on your chest, not to weigh you down, but to keep you still. Above you, the stars continue their ancient sweep. You've watched the dance of ice and fire, of heat answered not with force, but with grace. You've seen ingenuity chiseled into silence, labor woven into architecture, and wisdom suspended in each quiet drop of melting water. There is no rush here, no urgency, just the slow rhythm of breath and the long exhale of a world that once knew how to wait. Maybe you didn't come here looking for answers, but you found something gentler, a memory that cools, a design that listens, a truth buried not in complexity, but in quiet simplicity. So breathe in and feel the hush. Let your thoughts float like petals in a basin of cold rosewater. Let the questions go unanswered for now. There is time. The night deepens. The dome holds. The earth remembers. And you drift.